Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm going to talk to you today about what's inside the timing chest, and I'm going to show you how to fit a new belt. A lot of people I know carry belts and have them as a spare in their toolkit, so I'm going to show you what tools you're going to need to carry with you, and I'm also going to talk about these little idler rollers. This is an original, same as the ones that are on this car. They suffer problems because they have a very narrow single row ball race inside them. I have developed a new design which externally looks the same but is fitted inside with a much wider bearing. You can see the difference there. The bearings in the originals are just pressed in and have no way to secure them at all. In later versions a couple of circlets were put in to secure them. In my one there is a fixed turned shoulder against which the bearing is pressed and a circlet to hold it then in place. Makes for a safer setup. The other thing I would comment on is that when you take out one of these originals, the word that's written on it is Taiwan, whereas the ones I'm going to put in have got SKF written on them. Makes a big difference. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this belt off so that we can pretend that you're in a situation where your belt has failed and you're at the side of the road, and I'm going to show you the tools you're going to need and how to put a new belt on. Catch you in a minute. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, and we've got here a situation where the belt is already removed, is to use a 3/8 AF spanner on the end of the crankshaft and carefully turn the engine over until you can see this little notch in the side of the flange here lined up with the tiny arrow that's cast into the aluminium. I've put a little bit of chalk on that arrow so you can see it on this black painted engine, and you need to get that as accurately on centre of the arrow as you can. It might help if you take the spark plugs out and make the engine easier to turn over. Having got the notch on the flange down there lined up, the next thing to do, and this is something else you will have to carry in your toolkit, are 3/16 of an inch diameter steel pins, and they need to be just over an inch long. And in each of these pulleys you will see there is one hole which is smaller than the rest right out by the outside, and you can put that pin in the hole, and at the back you'll find there's a hole drilled in the aluminium, and although it's a bit sloppy, that will get the sprocket and the camshaft, of course, into the right place. Now, they're a bit difficult to turn over because of the springs on the cams, the valve springs, and if you turn whoa, as you can see, if you let go they tend to pop over on their own. Just trying to see. You can see if you look through that hole at the top there, you can just see the shiny hole drilled in the aluminium. We need to get this round in position, pop the steel pin in like that, and that will hold it in place. We can then sort out the third one. Which is there. It's worth making a little mental note that they are towards the outside of the casing, each of them, to give you a clue where to look. Having got that far, the next tool in your toolkit will need to be a 17mm spanner, and it needs to have a piece of string attached to it. That 17mm spanner, this is going onto an imperial nut, so it's a little bit tight, but you're more likely to have 17mm in your kit. Put that on the flange, on the flats of the middle of the tension roller, and then take your belt, and it has to have the writing up the right way as you look at it when you put it on. Push the spanner round in that direction and pop the belt into the gap. It should sit down nicely on that pulley. Then pull the spanner the other way, as far as it'll go without too much force. Take all the tension off the spring and tie the string up to a headlight bracket. We can now route the belt around the pulleys. Now you need to get it so that all the tension is, or so I say, all the slack is taken out, and even then it's a struggle to get them to go on. I need to get another notch there, I think. And on it goes. Don't be tempted to use a screwdriver or any other sort of lever to get it to go on, because you might damage the belt. Now keep the spanner in place, and the next thing you need to do is to put back these idler rollers. Now the idler roller on the front has the flange towards you. The idler roller on the rear cylinder has the flange away from you. Now I should perhaps explain at this point that this is the right hand side of a motorcycle, and so this is the front cylinder and this is the rear cylinder. Just to jog your memory, and this doesn't work on Harley Davidsons, but certainly on this S&S engine, the front cylinder is also towards the front of the car, and the rear cylinder is towards the back of the car when it's in the Morgan three-wheeler. So this is the front one, and what I'm going to put on here is not the one that we took off. You'll see a little trick that you have to, if you're putting the old ones back. In here there is an O-ring, and that little O-ring is put in there to hold these tiny flanges in place, and they are very mean as far as the spigot is concerned. My new ones have a much deeper spigot. They hold themselves together much easier to assemble. But if you're putting these on, get the O-ring pushed right into place with the bolt inside. That will hold it all together. You can then Okay, so I showed you vaguely how to put these things on. When you come to do the job, look at the flange. This one is marked rear, R for rear, and not only does it go on the rear cylinder, but it goes to the rear of the casing. The deep socketed spigot goes in the front, the thin spigot goes in the back. Make sure you press them all the way in. Bolt in through the deep one at the front. Now if you put the left hand one on first, by left hand I mean the rear cylinder, it will have a better chance of success, because the flange at the front of this one will prevent you from pulling the belt forward in order to get the flange on the back of this one. Now you'll find that you may have got a bit of slack in there somewhere, and you just need to make sure you work that slack all the way around. Okay, so it's taken me a couple of minutes to get this tension around this belt, and what often happens is that you find it's difficult to get the last tooth jumped over into place on this sprocket. in order to be able to get that idler in at the top there. So what I do is put a spanner on, just ease the crankshaft in that direction to give me a bit of slack to get the last tooth over, get that in, and then just bring the thing back, let the slack off the spanner, and then just check to make sure all three of these pins are still in position and the notch is lined up with a little arrow down the bottom, and then your valve timing will be right. Final check on these to make sure they're nicely tightened up. Don't want to overdo it on them because they're only in aluminium. And then with the aid of our 19mm spanner, we can just, easier said than done, just ease the weight off those pins to get them to come out. And there you are, job done. The other thing to mention is that you'll see there is no gasket on the face of here. You'll find that the cover, the useful thing to help you if you get stuck, is marked on the inside. It shows you the route for the belt so that you don't get confused. The covers were originally fitted on these engines with a gasket, but especially in places where the climate was quite hot, it was noticed that belts were failing very early, and it is heat that destroys these belts more than anything. So what the manufacturers did initially was discard the gasket and put four thick washers in there, and those washers space it off and allow air to flow around the belt and keep it cool. Some later models had a slit cut in here. On one of my cars I've drilled a little row of holes in there just to get some more air in to keep that belt cool. Okay then, to summarise, if you're going to carry a spare belt and all the tools you will need to fit it, you will need obviously the belt, you will need a 17mm open-ended spanner with a piece of string attached to one end. Never forget your trusty piece of string. You will need a 3/8 AF socket spanner, a 19mm or 3/4 inch AF socket spanner, obviously the Tommy bar to use them with. If you haven't had the modification done to your timing pinion, you will need one of these spline drive devices. This one is marked V8, I'm not quite sure what that means, because that's what you will have if you haven't had the modification done to the crankshaft. You'll need that to turn the engine over. You will also need to carry three 3/16 of an inch diameter pins, a bit over an inch long, maybe 1.5 inches long, to secure the 3 pulleys in place while you put the belt on, and then you should be able to do the job without any trouble. Going back to my modified idler pulleys, these carry an SKF double row angular contact bearing, very high quality, shouldn't ever let you down. They have a shoulder inside against which the bearing is pressed. A circlip then holds it onto there, and a pair of deep recessed spigots to go either side to accept the original mounting screw for the timing idler pulleys. Hopefully you'll never ever have to use it all, but if you do, I wish you luck. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.